This is going to be the beginning of a new unit, and basically this unit is going to be post-World War II America domestically. So all the things that we talked about, foreign policy as far as what was going on in the Cold War era, foreign policy-wise, this would be what's going on in the Cold War era domestically, and we're going to possibly, depending on what I do and when you're watching this video, which year, the post-fall of the Berlin Wall may be included in this unit as well, or it might be made into another unit. All of your key concepts and thematic learning objectives you can find in your reading guides. Not your reading guides, your graphic organizers. So we want to talk about, the first thing is demographic, economic, and cultural changes immediately, basically following the war. So basically roughly the time period of the 1950s. So after the war, you have America's faced with a number of problems created by the readjustment to peace. There's a threat of inflation, there's a return of unemployment, which is temporarily, and there's a housing shortage. And if you think about the fact that we had stopped consumer production, and if we start consumer production again, there's going to be less goods available, so of course they're going to rise dramatically in price. And so because of these problems, Truman is going to start something called the Fair Deal, and this is a legislative program promoted by him that uses the government to aid in the transition from a wartime economy to a peacetime economy. Part of this Fair Deal is going to be the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, or the GI Bill, which is going to offer veterans low-interest loans to buy homes, low-interest business loans, and money for college tuition. It's also going to have price control legislation immediately following the war to make sure that the goods don't become too expensive, an expansion of New Deal programs like minimum wage and Social Security, and a proposed healthcare reform. So we finally get healthcare reform in, I think, 2014 with Obama. This is something that has been proposed for quite some time, as you can see here. Now, I wanted to just briefly remind you that the New Deal is Franklin Roosevelt's plan for how to deal with the Great Depression, and the Fair Deal was Teddy Roosevelt's plan to sort of balance out the problems of the Gilded Age. So every time that we have one of these deals, we're trying to deal with the problem. And if you think about it, that square deal of Teddy Roosevelt comes on the heels of the Spanish-American War. The New Deal comes after the World War I, and the Fair Deal is going to come after World War II. There are going to be some demographic changes. You're going to have population shifts in the South and West because of jobs and climate. And you're also going to have an explosion in the population between 45 and 60 called the baby boom, which is going to be the largest generation in U.S. history. And these are just some pictures. You're also going to have a population migration out of the city. So when we talked about the Gilded Age, people were more increasingly moving to cities. These people aren't moving back out to farms, but they're moving to suburbs, which are residential communities around the outskirts of the city. And if you still don't understand what that is, Central is a suburb of Baton Rouge. There's going to be a post-war housing shortage, so in order to combat this, they're going to start building Levitt housing, which are mass-produced standardized housing that produce affordable homes. And this is going to be because of overcrowding is why people are moving to the suburbs. And also there's going to be a lot of white flight, which because of racial tensions, and soon you're going to have a desegregation order, and people are going to start leaving the cities because of this. And as a result, there's going to be minority-dominated urban areas and improvements to America's infrastructure. And we'll talk about the interstate system in just a minute. So these would be examples of the Levitt housing, and the best expression is the cookie cutter. Everything looks exactly the same. Now, speaking of the interstate system, the interstate system is also built during this time with the Interstate Highway Act of 56, and it provides funding for the construction of the interstate system, and it's supposed to provide transportation for two things. We have these suburbs, so people need better transportation from the suburbs to the cities, with the cities to the suburbs, and in the event of war of the USSR, it's a quick way for people to have a traffic flow. And so here's how the interstate system looks, and you know what the interstate system is. Now, there are also going to be some economic changes, and you don't necessarily need to write all of this down. The question is just describe the U.S. economy of the 1950s. If you can kind of just get all of this in a gist, you're going to be golden. There's going to be changes to the workforce. You have more college-educated people. Think about the GI Bill. You have a reduced number of those blue-collar, factory-type jobs and an increased number of these higher-paying white-collar jobs. White-collar jobs, management, office jobs, okay, professionals. There's going to be a resurrection of this consumer economy. You had people that were working during the war, but there were rationing and there weren't a lot of consumer goods, so people had savings, so there's going to be huge post-war spending. And there's going to be a rebirth of the advertising industry and a rebirth of the auto industry through marketing. You have different models and colors, and what you get is something called planned obsolescence. And this is this idea of having new models come out every year because it's literally like planning something as being obsolete. So the best example of this is going to be your iPhones or whatever phones. They come out with a new model every year, and even though there's nothing wrong with your phone, you need a new one, which is opposed to maybe before where people wouldn't get something new until it wore out. So it's this idea of marketing something new to people that they don't really need. You're going to get the development of franchise model of business. So think about fast food, and a lot of this is going to happen because of placing these businesses on interstate systems and people are traveling. You have corporate growth with the development of the conglomerate. And if you're not familiar with conglomerates, I mean, I don't know, I don't have a textbook definition in front of me, but think almost of like a modern day vertical integration. You know, it's not just one company that produces one thing. It's a company with multiple different levels. ABC Disney is a great example. They have the parks, they have the ABC, the ESPN, so it's sports, it's entertainment, it's characters, it's a lot of different things. And there's also going to be heavy military spending connected to the Cold War. It's going to become important part of the economy. Your middle class growth is going to explode. Disposable income is going to triple. There's a return of credit buying, but more than just installment plans is you're going to start getting credit cards, the Diners Club being the first one. And by the way, let me go back. When you're talking about cars, we're talking about these big boat, large cars that got like 10 miles to the gallon, and we're going to find out when they stop making this type of car because it's not fuel efficient. All right. And then, my McDonald's sign got messed up. Sorry about that. That was to go with the fast food. And then there's the Diners Club, the first credit card. Okay, and there's really going to be this rebirth of consumerism. People are going to want what other people have. Oh, they have it. We have to keep up with them. And this is where you get the keeping up with the Joneses. And this is going to be the true return of the consumer economy, and it's going to be one of the biggest economic booms in U.S. history. And think about it. After World War I, you had all the consumer goods, and you had the radio tech stocks, okay? It's going to be the same thing, except for you're going to have the invention of the television. And so by 53, it's going to be in 2/3 of American homes, and this growing popularity is going to result in this image of the American family. The white middle-class suburbanite, the white-collar husband, the stay-at-home mom. Remember that cult of domesticity. What's the woman's job? What is she supposed to do? This is going to be fuel for the consumer economy via advertising and the creation of common material desires for consumers, okay? They see something on the TV, so everybody's going to say, well, I want that. I want to be that. This promotion of this idea of the American dream. You have the home, you have the family, the 2.5 children, the job, the car. Don't forget the white picket fence and the apple pie. So it's sort of like creating this idea of what the ideal American should be, even though the majority of Americans probably really didn't fit into this mold. Okay, and you have this return of conformity, and some popular shows from the time are, this would be Leave It to Beaver. You had I Love Lucy, The Honeymooners. I'm going to show you a few pictures. The only one of these shows I ever remembered was Leave It to Beaver, and it wasn't on when I was younger, but it was on in reruns. This is Leave It to Beaver. This is a picture of the family from Ozzie and Harriet, I believe, and then this is Father Knows Best. So all of these TV shows had 2 to 3 children, and the mom with the little dress and the pearls, and the dad with the gray flannel suit and the corporate job, and so they portrayed the American family. This is what you want your family to look like. Some had 2, some had 3, the 2.5 kids. All right, the mom stays at home and dinner's ready on the table whenever the dad gets home. All right, so this is all going to create a little bit of rebellion, which is what happens after World War I. Think about the lost generation, the writers that write about the delusionment of the time. One of those being F. Scott Fitzgerald, who writes Great Gatsby. Think about it. You've all read it. This is one of the books you have to read. You know, people are, the Gatsby is all about, you know, the disgust with the culture of the 20s and the consumerism and the way that people are. And so you're going to get a development of youth culture. And so the thing just says describe a teenager. You don't have to write all this down, but teenagers or rebellious youth, it's going to be embedded in the 50s because the teens start to develop their own subculture, which is often rejecting their parents' ideals, standards, music, and developing their own language and music and fashion and movies and TV shows. So, you know, rock and roll and stuff like that. These youth are, you know, their parents grew up in the Depression. They were more likely to go to college. They were more likely to actually have money and leisure time, which increased their independence and spending. They're a product of this booming economy. They are, they have different views than their parents. They have more access to media, and they're more likely to be portrayed as rebellious and irresponsible. Okay? These are pictures of things that come out of this generation. I mean, think about how rebellious it was in Hairspray, that they were dancing, or some of the things that they did. Some of those people, the children, the teenagers, had the audacity to dance with the black people. So they were rebellious. It's not necessarily that what they were doing is wrong. It's just that they didn't have the same values as their parents. And they're going to have a huge economic impact because manufacturers are going to start targeting this youth market with clothing and radios and entertainment, and rock and roll music and media and movies promote the image of this troubled, rebellious teenager. And Elvis is an example of some of the music they listen to. And then, of course, James Dean would probably, and Rebel Without a Cause would be the best example of a movie where he's just this rebellious teenager. Now, the last thing that I want to talk to you guys about that might not necessarily be teenagers, but some teenagers would fit in this category, and these would be a little bit more extreme examples of the rebellious attitude that comes out of the 1950s. And I'm not sure if you're doing this on your computer, or I may have given you a handout. If the word beatnik was not added to your this right here to your graphic organizer, please add it. The end of the 50s, by the end of the 50s, you're going to start having segments of America. So this isn't just the teenagers. This is going to be people that are openly resisting conformity to both the American dream and the societal status quo. So these are really going to be your F. Scott Fitzgeralds, all right? The people that are speaking out against it. So it's not just your teenagers, but some of them might have been these teenagers in the early 50s. The subculture that develops among some intellectuals in the 50s in opposition. So here's where the beatniks are. So these aren't necessarily teenagers, but they're a subculture of people, and they're mainly intellectuals in the 50s, and they oppose the materialism and consumer culture of the 50s, the conformity to the American dream, and the conformity to 50s moral and social standards. They shun 9-to-5 employment, they experiment with drug use, and they're the predecessors to the hippie movement. And make sure you at least know one example. Jack Kerouac is one of the authors of the movement, and he writes a book called On the Road. And it kind of chronicles the adventures of these two guys that travel across the country. And, you know, one of them has several wives and several children in the along the way, and they have many adventures that go against what would have been considered the American dream and the status quo. And so this is really, again, I hate to keep repeating the same thing, but think of F. Scott Fitzgerald, Gatsby. You know, these writers are writing, or they are this beatnik generation, are the ones that are disillusioned with the culture that is the 1950s, like other people were disillusioned with the 1920s. Okay, so that is that section of notes. The next thing we will discuss is all of this is going to sort of, in my opinion, start many reform movements, one being the civil rights movement, and there'll be other reform movements that kind of come out of this beatnik counterculture, people rebelling against the way that the status quo thinks that things should be.